What's up, my friends? Welcome back to Carpo's channel. Today we're going to ask a question. Knowledge or truth? A person may think that those are the same thing, and of course, when you really pick it apart, knowledge would be the truth that you know, and the truth would be the truth. But no, they are not. They're mutually exclusive, let's say. Knowledge itself, what you know, what we think we know, is based on the environment that we were raised in, what we were told, how we perceive things, our biases, several other things. It's very important, this topic, to me specifically, because I think it's important for the world. I think it's one of the most crucial and important topics we could talk about in today's environment. Whereas when I come out and start talking about knowledge, or the media, which is what this is going to be about partially, instantly, just like when I see a video with the same title or ideas, I just roll my eyes and think, oh, here we go again. Somebody else's opinion on media bias and how we got to where we're at and how to get out of it. Why do I think this is the most crucial topic to talk about? Because it's the most dangerous aspect of society right now, misinformation. But it's more than just the information itself, because you can put out misinformation all day long, and if people are content and they know better and they're educated, they'll laugh it off, and eventually they won't listen to you anymore. At least in theory. Today, in today's world, you can walk down the street or sit at home with something like this, a simple GoPro, a little voice recorder like this. When I was young, you were lucky to get a tape recorder that you could record on, but even then you had to go through and find the spot you were at, and the tape would get eaten. The point being, interviewing back then was fairly expensive. Today, making a video for anyone can be a, quote, journalist. And this has got us into an interesting situation. When I was younger, I remember when I discovered that the media was completely screwed and biased, and that it was probably started around the time of the O.J. Simpson chase and the whole trial, which I'll never forget, because back then I was partying with my friends, and we went over to this one guy's house, and every time we went over, his old mom was sitting there on the couch with their blanket on watching the O.J. trial. This went on for weeks. I don't even recall exactly how long it was. But from that day forward, everything changed. It became breaking news. 24-hour news channel came around that time. Before that, there was no 24-hour news. You'd watch news for half an hour and get on with your day. Maybe once a week there was a 60 Minutes, which would cover a topic, which often were decent topics. So the media, and the reason that there's a lot of talk about fake news over the last several years. Now, let's just be fair here. For the most part, at least 99% of the time, the media is not fake news in the sense that they make up stories. And I think this is a dangerous thing to believe, because I've spoken with people who, for example, when I asked them, well, what about this video you saw, or this story that you heard, they'd say, well, that was just a fake story. Or, as I heard somebody say the other day, it was just optics. They were created, These scenes never happened. They were all actors. This comes from the crisis actor syndrome of the last 4 years, where when something extreme happens, it must be either actors or Antifa. And the ignorance has gotten to the level where even I've talked to folks who, during the January 6th, when they overtook partially overtook the Capitol, there's still people who are saying that that never really happened, or that it was all staged, that they were all people in costumes, that it was all Antifa dressed up. So, before you get politically disheveled here because I brought that up, just realize I'm not an Antifa supporter any more than I'm a Proud Boy supporter. I look at both of these groups and see how they're blamed for separate incidents, which may or may not be true. But the scary part is what it's led us to this point where, even though you see the video of what's happening, we deny it to ourselves. And it may be easy to do that when you see one media covering one topic or a subject, or one film of something. You could say, well, that was faked, or that was CGI. And with the deep fakes of today, it's becoming even more difficult to know what's true. It's a scary future for knowledge as far as videos. But when you have 100 different cameras at 100 different angles of the same thing, that's when you can kind of draw your conclusions that, okay, this is really happening, whatever it may be. It's got to the point where we can't even trust individuals to report information. We have to trust an organization or people en masse. But the organizations themselves are biased, and we know that they're only allowed to talk about certain things. So you get to a mainstream media organization like Fox or CNN, from the top down, they need their revenue. So they won't talk bad about these large corporations if they're causing problems. For example, if Amazon advertises on NBC, do you think they're going to run a whole hour-long segment on how fucked up Amazon is to their workers or to society in general? No, of course not. They also need good stories, which means it's not about fake news, it's about embellishment. It's about blowing a story out of proportion, either telling false angles of it, not covering the real point of the story, or just bringing forward stories that don't matter. They might do a 10-minute segment on the news about something that's really irrelevant to 99.9% of the people and will never affect anyone, and just to fill time, because they won't cover things like soldiers dying in Iraq still, or this 20-year war that's been going on, or the government doing these testing on their own people over the years. Now this is important because this is where I'm separating media from journalism. There is still fantastic journalism out there, and I want to say it's bothersome to me that journalists get swept under the rug with this whole, oh, it's mainstream, it's fake, it must not be true. Anytime an organization or a group gets too big, people assume that they must have a vested interest and that they are biased, and everyone is biased, first off. Second of all, yes, companies do have to get funded and paid, but there are still journalists out there who bust their ass and cover great stories. They get swept under the rug and almost treated as traitors a lot of the time, because they're the ones who really open people's eyes to what's going on with corporations, with businesses, the real criminals, and the politicians. I'll give you a perfect example would be the Paradise Papers. The Paradise Papers were released a few years back. This was a year-long, 9 months to a year, that hundreds of journalists got together and secretly worked on different angles of this one. And if you haven't heard of the Paradise Papers, that's exactly my point. It was something that was swept under the rug. They were able to expose through one company that it was one insurance or brokerage or something, all of these, thousands of connections between politicians, guys like Rex Tillerson and a couple other guys in the Trump administration at the time. But this is where the whole Russia connection thing came into play. A lot of people never followed this back. No, it wasn't that Russia had anything to do with the election itself. It was that a lot of people within the cabinet had deals with Russian companies. But this whole thing was exposing offshore accounts. And what they were saying is, here's these billionaires who are telling everyone else to pay their taxes. And there's something like $21 trillion just that they know of through this one journalist. They scoured for months. And the whole list was posted online and all the information about it. Most people, I'm guessing, won't ever read all those papers or even comprehend the connections or what they mean, because the average person doesn't have the capacity to understand all the angles. None of us do. Which is why we as a collective make decisions. Which is why when somebody says that's mainstream, or a lot of people believe that, so it must not be true, how ridiculous that really is. Yes, a lot of people believe a lot of things that aren't true. Just look at religion. Somebody has to be wrong, right? But a lot of people also believe that they're in the right for a variety of different reasons. The Paradise Papers were just one of these, stories that were covered. There's places like up in Canada, they've got, even little local things like, I can't remember the guy's name, but I used to watch him all the time. He's got the Hall of Shame. I can't remember. He's an old guy, and he just confronts these people, like, locally in their towns, like contractors who rip people off. He basically does stories about local companies who are screwing people over, and he gets in their face and they threaten him, and he's got balls. He sticks his neck out there and he runs out with his cameraman to try to expose some asshole. And hey, look, we need people like that. We need good journalists, but even they need to get paid. So you either have a good story that's a real story, or you embellish on some bullshit story. But the thing is, these larger media companies, they squander money away in advertising and huge office buildings. They have to make that back. Therefore, they need a lot of ad revenue. And so they have to make up stories, at least parts of stories. And sure, there have been plenty of cases of bullshit stories and bad informants, but that's, for the most part, the stories are true. They're just embellished, and they might not even be important. But a more important aspect of this goes back to the 50s and 60s, what they called the Red Scare, which was when they were trying to make Americans fearful of communism as if it was the end of the world. Now, I'm not a supporter of communism. I'm not a supporter of any current systems we have in place, let's put it that way. But what they've done is use this to basically smear anyone who wants to benefit the small guy. Communists have, even the people, for those who scream socialist at anyone who wants basic programs. It's the same thing that they said about workers who were standing and picketing 100 years ago for fair wages and equality. The Pinkerton security agency came to mow them down and kick their asses because they were asking for fair wages and hours. Anybody who wants any type of fair treatment is considered a socialist or a communist at the time. So they use these Red Scare type tactics, just like Fox does. You go on there and you listen to any one of their commentators. They come on talking about socialists or these welfare recipients as if it's the end of the world. Immigration is the biggest problem we have. Then in the same breath they talk about how there's nobody to do these jobs. And it's just this ridiculous my team, your team bullshit. And people fall for it. But even the ones who pretend to be neutral, such as should be neutral, like public broadcasting, say, like BBC in the UK, the intention was to be fair and balanced. Since they don't have the ad revenue part, then they should be able to say what they like, but they don't, because they still have to answer to the state. You still need the tax revenue, the funding. And with this, it becomes nearly impossible to know who's telling you the truth. But we still have to be able to trust our eyes and ears and reason, which is why I think education is important. Do you trust the masses? Do you trust your eyes? Or do you trust one guy on the news sitting there telling you what you want to hear? Unfortunately, a lot of people choose the latter. They just want somebody who's going to tell them what they want to hear. Now look, it pains me to sit and hear people spew things that I don't agree with. But I listen for the sake of trying to get the other viewpoint. Even when I do, you get these guys like Ben Shapiro, these, squeaky little dudes who have never faced any real adversity in their lives, who have never had to work a real job in their lives. Probably guys never even got his hands dirty and preens his fingernails all day long. And these guys pretend like they're these, tough guys trying to fight liberalism and these damn communists who are trying to ruin the country. They have bought into the propaganda from their side, just like these people on the extreme left with their, cancel culture madness they've taken the bait on a different angle. Neither one of them really have any claim to truth or how our society is going to be destroyed the minute this president becomes, or this one does. It's like, no, that's not how it works. We forget that it's us, not them. It seems that people allow the media to dictate what's true to them because they choose not to think for themselves. They choose not to do critical research. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who have said, well, I heard this was true, and I was like, well, where'd you read that, or where'd you hear it? And they say, I don't know, somebody said it on some show somewhere. It's like, no, if you're going to make a claim about something, you need to have at least some form of an evidence or a reason, which brings us to feels. Do you trust your feels? Which is the one that goes beyond trusting the masses or trusting your eyes. And I think I've heard this more than a few times when I try to push a little further to say, well, how do you know this is true? A person says, I just know it, or I just feel it. Feelings also cause wars. Feelings also cause murder. Feelings are what cause jealous husbands to, beat their wives because they think they cheated when they never really did. Feelings are what caused witch hunts in the past. It's a way of pointing the finger at someone else. And therefore, and one of the important point here is that when times are difficult and people are stressed, that's when they tend to lash out the most and find a scapegoat or an enemy, which in this case would be somebody of an opposite political belief, which is absolutely absurd. But during times of stress, if we're ignorant, this ignorance leads to fear, paranoia. And this fear and paranoia turns into anger because we don't want to feel that way. Then this anger causes us to produce cortisol and lose our critical thinking skills. When you are in fight or flight, you can't think clearly. I mean, it's a well-known phenomenon. When you're constantly stressed and angry, you can't think clearly at all, and you tend to lose your critical thinking skills over time, as if your body's always looking just to fight. Then you might encounter these people as the person who, the minute you say something they don't agree with, they start getting all upset and screaming that you're an idiot, without being able to actually identify what the problem is or what you disagree with. The media, it's easy to point the finger. It's easy to blame people. It's easy to generalize, and we all have some bias. But the media feeds on hyperbole. Everything with full-blown exclamation marks. Even when I click on my local news, which I rarely do, but at the very top, there's a red banner. Breaking news. I just looked earlier to say it was Beverly Cleary dies. Okay, Beverly Cleary, bless her soul. She was an amazing author. But that's not the kind of thing that people need to see as breaking news. This is where people lose faith, is when people blow things up as if it's something you have to know right now. Some of them are even worse than that. It's like breaking news, so-and-so feels a certain way about so-and-so, or breaking news, Prince William. I mean, it's just, But I think that because of this, because of all the information overload, a lot of folks choose selective reasoning. Meaning they choose what they want to reason. They can think something totally through if it's something that they stand for, but if it's something that conflicts with what they want to believe, they completely shut down and ignore reality. And ignoring reality harms us all, which may bring a person to come full circle and say, well, then what is reality? What is truth? Well, first off, real truth does exist. Deal with it. We all have to deal with it. Doesn't mean we all know what it is. And as I said at the beginning, knowledge is different from truth because our truth is subjective. My truth is different from your truth. There are many little aspects. I think it's true that the universe may be, I don't know, let's just not get into that part of the spiritual side of it. But for example, sitting in the middle sometimes is the most difficult position to be. So I believe the universe is conscious, but I don't believe in a religion. I'll be chastised by an atheist for believing that the universe could even be conscious or aware that there might be something beyond this reality, and chastised by the extreme Christians for not believing exactly the God they believe and the exact path to get to enlightenment that they believe. It's just the same in politics. If you point out what's wrong with Antifa and what's wrong with the Proud Boys, you're just going to get crap from both sides. There's very few people I've talked to who don't pick a side on issues. Even though I support Black Lives Matter and the whole racial justice, I don't support all of the methods, and I don't think that that racism is the biggest issue in all of the police problems, right? I know that there's deeper systemic issues that affect whites and blacks and browns and everyone else, and everyone wants to be kind of the center of their own reality, and then when something conflicts with that, it's like we're looking for a fight. It has to end, people. It has to stop. This fighting amongst ourselves is just ridiculous. When you finally find a common ground, you might realize it was there the whole fucking time. It's like last summer when I saw these, I don't remember, it just popped into my head, when I saw these Black Lives Matter group marching with these, not white supremacists, I guess they were just, patriot groups of some, militia. But what did they have in common? They all liked guns. Whatever you feel about guns, the point was that they had found a common ground. They wanted to protect their cities. And realizing how many people out there really have good intentions. But because it's so confusing out there, they don't know how to act. And they lose their minds. And then a few dumbasses make everyone else look bad. This happens everywhere. And the media plays right on that because their job is to turn you against each other. You don't hear anybody preaching unity. You hear them complaining about the other side. It's like I said, you can turn on any Fox commentary and the first thing they're going to do is complain about liberals within the first minute. You know, just like when you turned on CNN, it'd be Trump in the first minute. God damn it. Media needs to get away from this shit. Politics are not the center of, personal politics or politicians' lives are not the center of everyone's attention, but people buy into it. And that's the final thing I have to say. We are the consumers. Regardless of the ad agencies or what the marketing, what they can tell you, what they can't talk about on the news, how ridiculous some of the stories might be. The end consumer is you and me. I don't watch the news. I know a lot of people don't watch the news anymore, but a lot of people still do. And as long as people still watch the news and believe it, then we're going to continue to have these battles over who's right and who's wrong, because very few people are watching all the angles. Because it's painful. If you're a regular Fox viewer, the last thing you want to do is watch CNN, and vice versa. They're both fucked. Best bet would just to look at the headlines from everywhere, base your own assessments, but look into the stories, look at the stories people are telling. This has become more complicated because all this fake book nonsense and people posting shit that isn't real. The dream or illusion of the independent journalist saving the day hasn't manifested yet, but I'm hoping it will. And there's a lot out there. We just have to find them, and they will be swept under the rug. So keep an eye out for the good journalists. Keep an eye out for people who have an honest eye for truth, that are supported because they do the right thing, not because they tell us what we want to hear. And be as educated as we can on the topics. That's all. That's about all I got. So thanks for listening, and I appreciate your time. Thank you to my patrons. If you'd like to support me, you can go to my Patreon channel. It's in the description. They have some extra videos on there, and I'll be uploading a couple more later. I'm trying to upload regular videos and blogs for people, as well as my Discord server and my podcast, 15-Minute Free Thinking, which I'll be uploading another one in a little while. Try to do one each week. Be well. Take care of each other. Don't believe everything you see and hear, but remember, you've got to believe something. You got to realize that these stories are, at least usually, real stories. It's not all crisis actors. It's not all set up. But there's going to be some points that need to be found out, and that's where the independent journalists come in to fill in the blanks. Because most of the stories these, quote, independent journalists cover are ones that were seen on mainstream news first, and then they give their own take on it. So Associated Press obviously plays a role in us getting information, so let's not just throw everything out just yet. Maybe we can mend it. We'll see. It's up to us and them. It's always us and them. Be well, friends.